The good man of Menstrie, William Alexander, was a controversial figure. He became a royal courtier, poet, and coloniser. The Alexanders of Menstrie had been granted the lands and barony by the Campbells of Argyll in the 1520s. Around 50 years later, William Alexander was born to Alexander and his wife, Marion Graham. While still young, his father died, and in 1580 or 81, the youngster inherited the Menstrie estate following the death of his older brother Alexander. It fell to his uncle, James Alexander, the Burgess of Stirling, to raise and educate him. He attended the grammar school of Stirling on Castle Wynd, where he became interested in the classics, learning Latin, and was a keen scholar in a broader sense. His tutor was Thomas Buchanan, a close relative of the more famous George Buchanan, the historian. When he was a young man, it's thought he attended the University of St Andrews or the University of Glasgow, and went on to study at Leiden in the Netherlands, although his name doesn't appear on their records. Being on the continent gave Alexander a thirst for travel, and at Castle Campbell in Dollar, where he was friends with the Argylls, the 7th Earl, Archibald, later asked Alexander to accompany him on his tour of Europe. Alexander jumped at the chance. In 1597, Argyll granted Alexander the £5 land of the Mains of Menstrie, and subsequently granted him all the Menstrie lands. Argyll also introduced him to James VI, and soon the king and Alexander became close. It was also around this time he recited his poetry for the king, and James called him my philosophical poet. His influence on the king grew, and this helped his rise to power. He penned a long poem about Darius in 1603, which he dedicated to James, and the king was so pleased, he made him tutor and companion to his son, Prince Henry. Another poem he penned was the epic Doomsday, which was published in 4 volumes in 1614. Around 1603, he met and married Janet, the daughter of William Erskine of Balgony, and the couple went on to have 11 children. Alexander secured a royal pension of £100 per annum, thanks to his discussions with the king about the recovery of unpaid taxes to the crown between 1547 and 1588. Alexander believed he would receive thousands of pounds because he'd come up with this idea, but in fact was paid nothing, and James kept the money. By this time the king had moved his court to London, and keeping Alexander close, he granted him a knighthood in 1608. He had the finances to maintain his status and ran a silver mine in Menstrie, but by 1616, the money and the silver had run out. That notwithstanding, during the summers between 1617 and 1620, he still travelled back to his ancestral home in Menstrie. Having been appointed to the Privy Council on 1 July 1615, this meant he had to travel to Edinburgh from Menstrie to attend council meetings. Moreover, in 1617, he personally accompanied the king on his visit to Scotland. While at Menstrie, though, he liked nothing better than to sit and pen his poems. In 1619, Alexander had the unenviable task of preventing people in Scotland travelling to England in his role as Master of Requests, unless they were gentlemen. 4 years after his appointment to the Privy Council, his reputation for helping the king covertly with one scheme or another spread through the court, and this led him to being disliked by many. Around this time, Alexander conceived the idea of colonising in North America. On 5th August 1621, he was granted a charter from the Privy Council to execute his plan. It granted him 60,000 square miles of land between Cape Sable and the St. Croix River, in what was to become Nova Scotia. He secured vast rights, including mineral rights, taxes, the sale of land, and exemption from all customs in Scotland for 7 years. His greatest achievement was the coining of money. He also had power over the justiciary, therefore could make and change laws, grant charters, and bestow honours. However, all of this came at a price, and from his own pocket, the venture cost £6,000. With the scheme struggling to find people willing to go to what is now Canada, Alexander turned his attention to missionaries and the church, but still few took him up on the idea. 6 knights eventually purchased 6,000-acre parcels of land and a baronetcy, but this led to angry demonstrations, and with Thomas Hamilton, the then Earl of Melrose, at the helm, they protested to the king. By this time Charles I was on the throne, and he was having none of it. He sacked Melrose and appointed Alexander Secretary of State for Scotland. In 1627, Alexander was appointed Keeper of the Signet, which meant he had 5 seals in his care, with each signature to be paid for. This helped his finances. A year later, he secured the lands and barony of Menstrie and Tullibody the following year. He donated money to the poor in Stirling, where he received the freedom of the town, and purchased his townhouse, Argyll's Lodging, in 1629. On 4th September 1630, he became Viscount Stirling and Lord Alexander of Tullibody, and went on to design his own coat of arms. He also rebuilt the extended Menstrie Castle and bought Tillicoultry Estate on 12th July 1634. However, he returned to England impoverished, having overstretched himself financially, with creditors demanding what he owed. On 12th February 1640, William Alexander died, in the end owing just £200. He was brought back to Stirling, and it was planned that he was to be buried under the cover of darkness in Bowie's Isle in the High Kirk of Stirling, the Church of the Holy Rood, on 12th April. Over 20 years earlier, Alexander had purchased the space. However, creditors denied him his resting place, blocking the entrance, and he remained outside in his lead coffin. For over 100 years he remained in situ until demolition works took place, and his remains were scattered to the 4 winds. The Earl's titles went to his 7 or 8-year-old grandson, William Alexander. His eldest son, Anthony, had died in 1637 without issue, and his second son, William, had also predeceased him. But the little boy died in May 1640, so the titles went to Henry Alexander, the first Earl's 3rd son. In the end, the title of Earl of Stirling died out in 1739 on the death of the 5th Earl, Henry, on 4th December that year, at the age of 75. The grammar school where Alexander was taught no longer exists. It was demolished and replaced by a new school in 1788 and is now a hotel. Argyll's lodging is in the care of Historic Environment Scotland, and Menstrie Castle houses a small museum run by the National Trust for Scotland. If you enjoyed this episode of Scotland's History, please like, comment and subscribe. Until next time, thank you for watching.